Today we talk to Monica Kelsey, who was abandoned at birth and now does all that she can to assure that other abandoned babies receive the care and the support that they need. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Pro-Life Guys podcast. My name is Peter, host of the show, and with me again is my good friend and wonderful co-host, Cameron Cote. How are you, sir?
I am doing very well. I've been on an emotional roller coaster ever since I read the book of the guest we're having on today. I won't spoil it right now. I'll let you introduce her in just a moment here. But I can't say that I'm a particularly emotional guy. Rarely do I weep, especially while I'm reading books and whatnot. But it is such a powerful book. That's just a bit of a foretaste of what we're going to be getting into. But it has been an interesting week as I've been plowing through this book in preparation for this interview here. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing very well, thanks. Doing very well. For those of you who are new to the program, we are two guys who are passionate about ending the killing of preborn children in Canada, and this podcast is dedicated to giving you the tools that you need to change hearts and save lives. And one of the things we often do on the podcast is to share a little bit more about some of the other ministries that are out there, some of the other organizations, some of the other leaders who are doing some phenomenal work in protecting both born and preborn children. And that's what we want to talk about today. Our guest today is Monica Kelsey. She is the founder of Safe Haven Baby Boxes, the only safe haven organization that is saving abandoned babies through electronically monitored boxes installed in fire stations and in hospitals. Stay tuned because we are going to be talking about those boxes, and they are something else. I'm not going to spoil it now, but do stay tuned. Monica Kelsey is also the author of Blessed to Have Been Abandoned, the story of the baby box lady. She has appeared on numerous radio programs, commercials, videos, and has spoken at conventions and rallies around the world. She has been sharing her pro-life views with millions of people since February of 2011 and works diligently to support pro-life legislators who take a stand to defend the lives of children conceived in rape. Monica is also a firefighter and a medic out of Indiana and spends her spare time saving the lives of strangers as well. Monica's mission is simple, as you're going to be able to tell throughout this episode, and that is protect all human life from conception until natural death. Our guest today is Monica Kelsey. We hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we did. Monica, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me today.
Yeah, we're really excited to have a bit of a conversation about the work you do, about your book, but also about your life. And that's where we'd like to start. I mean, the baby boxes we want to talk about and the work that you do, just protecting and defending some of these abandoned children. But as you write in your book and as you share elsewhere, the work that you do is intimately tied with your life story. And so let's start there. Could you share with us a little bit about your journey, about your life?
Yeah, I always grew up and I knew that I was adopted, but I had no idea of what my story was. But I always knew that I wanted to meet my biological mother one day and thank her because she chose life for me. And so I graduated high school. I joined the United States military, spent 8 years defending my country, and then married the love of my life and started a family. And so as the time went on, I really felt a need to want to reach out to her and to find her. And so I did find her when I was 37 years old. And to kind of tell you the backstory, I have to take you back, though, to August of 1972, when a young 17-year-old girl was brutally attacked and raped and left along the side of the road. And this, of course, was when abortion was illegal in the United States, even in the cases of rape and incest. And she pressed charges against the man who had raped her. He was arrested and he was charged. And then if that wasn't the worst of it, 6 weeks later, she finds out she's pregnant when she felt that her life was finally getting back to some normalcy. And she actually confided in her mom, and her mom's answer was to take her daughter to a back alley abortion facility in October of 72. And while standing in front of the man that was going to take her child's life, the 17-year-old girl was strong enough to say, "I can't do this." And she left that facility and never looked back. She was hidden for the remainder of the pregnancy and then gave birth in April of 1973 and abandoned her child 2 hours after that child was born, and that child was me. So my biological father is a rapist, and I don't even know my ethnicity, but I'm still a human being, and I still have value, and my life isn't worth less simply because of my beginnings. And I truly didn't deserve the death penalty for the crime of my biological father. So, today I stand on the front lines of not only the pro-life movement, but the safe haven movement, making sure that every life is protected, and that these mothers have a safe place to fall. And killing their child is just not a safe place for them.
Absolutely. And I think that that's so beautiful. The background of your story, I think there's tremendous courage in so much of, as you mentioned, that frontline ministry that you have done. We're going to dive into that very extensively in just a moment or two here. I have a copy of your book here on my desk. I had the great pleasure of being able to read it a couple times coming into this interview, and it is absolutely beautiful, this journey. And I'm curious. I'm sure that the emotional roller coaster that you have been on in many ways your entire life, but I'm sure there's been peaks and valleys and whatnot. And in your time, especially as being a pro-life leader, as being the executive director and founder of the Safe Haven baby boxes in Indiana and your support across the country, I'm sure that you have seen and heard abortion advocates obviously speak very frequently about the conditions, as it were, in which you came into existence and your mother's situation and whatnot. And I'm curious how you put into words what goes through your mind when you hear these exceptions for abortion, or when people present this idea. Do you take that personally? Do you feel as though that is simply a lack of information and education for these people, that you just need to reach out to them and help them understand this is a reality? Or what goes through your mind, and how do you articulate that to people as somebody who has these beginnings and has had such a beautiful and in many ways impactful existence through your entire existence, not just since you've been doing pro-life work, but through everything?
Well, I do take it personal, and that probably can be one of my downsides, because sometimes I get angry, and anger never solves anything. But for me, when somebody says I'm pro-life accept, they're taking my worth and making it smaller. And so, as you read my book, you know that I'm a firefighter and a medic. And when I first learned this, that I wasn't a child conceived with wine and roses, I was a child whisked into this world by violence. I just felt like I had to prove my worth to other people. And so I buried myself in the back of an ambulance saving lives, because I felt that the more lives I saved, the more I could convince you that my life was worthy of living. And that's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. But I buried myself in it. And I speak nationally and internationally. I've been all across this world. And I'll tell you, I go into churches, and I hear people in the church say, well, I'm pro-life accept what? And those are God's people. Those are people that are supposed to be the hands and feet of Christ. And the Bible says that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We are knit in our mother's wounds, and we are made in the image of God. And that is just not talking about your life, guys. That is talking about my life too. And so I really think education is what needs to come into play. But I also understand their conflict, because when a woman is raped, like my birth mom, who was brutally attacked and raped and left along the side of the road, I mean, our immediate response is to feel for her. And we wouldn't be human if we didn't feel for her first. And so feeling for her and trying to take the pain away is naturally what we're going to try and do. But we can't deny the fact that a child has been conceived and did not deserve to die because of someone else's actions. And so, I hope that people will understand that a woman who is raped has to be, she has to heal emotionally. She has to heal physically. She has to heal spiritually. Killing her child is not going to change any of that. She still has to heal. I mean, if she kills her child, she's just now added more to healing spiritually, healing physically, healing emotionally. And people have to understand that taking a life does not justify a woman being raped and trying to help her. I look at my own life now, and as you know in my book, I was one of those people that were sitting in church making that excuse for people. And I really had to check myself when I found my biological mother and learned the circumstances. And through education and through the empathy of my birth mom, getting to know her made me truly realize that there can be no exceptions. There can be no exceptions. A child is a child of God, and he makes no mistakes at all.
Amen. Amen. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. And Peter, when you and I are on street corners and on doorsteps, that's so often what we convey of, if my father were a guilty rapist, would I have any less value than you do? And if not now, then why the moment that we were conceived? Why the moment that we first came into existence? This notion that you're not in the real world until you've been born, and that anything can happen to you until that point is just as foolish as saying that somebody who's in high school isn't in the real world until they get a real job, sort of thing. It's just insane to think that you could take that logic towards killing that child. And you mentioned, Monica, your speaking experience. I have seen bits and pieces of YouTube videos. I've never seen you speak in person. I'm amazed by the content that you deliver and the passion and the way that you're able to share your story. And there's one trip that you outline very concretely in the book as we start to talk a little bit more about the safe haven baby boxes, and a trip that you took with Pam Stenzel to South Africa. And I rather than me trying to pick out what my favorite parts of the story were, as I read through it, I'd love to just invite you to share about what in many ways I think it's fair to say is a bit of a crossroads and a bit of a pivotal point in your journey. You had been speaking about your experience of your upbringing, learning and connecting with your mother. And this trip to South Africa really changed the way that pro-life ministry happened in your life. And I was wondering if you could just share that with us, I guess, how that trip really, I don't even know the right word, transition the way that you were applying so much of your time and energy in ways that serve preborn children and mothers in very difficult circumstances, I guess.
Well, I don't think that there's ever a mistake. I think Christ knew I was going to be on that plane headed to Cape Town, South Africa. And, I love talking about me jumping off the side of a cliff, in Cape Town, South Africa. I literally was parasailing, and through the middle of the parasailing, I actually asked the person that I was strapped to, how do I get back up to my friends? Because I literally jumped off this cliff, having no idea how I was getting back up to the top of this mountain in another country. And so basically I was jumping and had no idea where I was going to land either. And that is where I kind of look at baby boxes. When I launched baby boxes, I had no idea where I was going to land. I just knew that if Christ was going to take me there, he was going to land me safely. And so I happened to be in Cape Town, South Africa, speaking on a speaking tour with Pam Stenzel, who's a huge abstinence speaker. She's a pro-life speaker. She just dominates the circuit in the United States. And we happened to be speaking at a church in Cape Town that had what they called a baby safe. And and this is interesting, guys, because this was the only church in Cape Town that had this. Hundreds of churches, and I just happened to be at the one place that Christ needed me to be at. And so I was so intrigued by this, being a firefighter and a medic. I mean, there's a safe haven law in America where you can walk into a fire station or a hospital and hand your child to a person, no questions asked. And that law has been around for 20 years, so I knew about that law. But this was taking that law in America in a different country to another step. And I started asking all the questions. What is this? What is it used for? And she said, well, women come at night and they don't want to face anyone. And instead of them dumping their children in dumpsters where it's unsafe for their babies, they'll bring them here. And the last baby that had been saved there, they named Moses, and he was adopted by a member of the church. And I said, well, how many babies have been saved? And they had saved 7 that year. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this really a thing? And so on the trip back from Cape Town, South Africa, on a Delta napkin. I mean, every good idea starts on a Delta napkin, right? Well, Baby boxes literally started on a Delta napkin on my way back from Cape Town, South Africa, to the United States, and that was the beginning of the journey, um, launching me into not only a pro-life speaker but also standing on the front lines of babies not being abandoned anymore in our country.
That is phenomenal, and one of those pivotal moments, as Cam said, in your journey. But maybe like one of the questions I have, and maybe some of our audience as well, is when we look at other parts of the world and perhaps our naivety, it's easy to think that babies being abandoned in other parts of the world that aren't quite like, Canada and the United States, which are far greater in our minds than everywhere else. That's something that seems plausible, but are there really babies that are abandoned in the United States? Are there really babies that are abandoned in Canada? We don't really hear about them. That's not on the mainstream media. So let me ask you the question. So you had this great idea. You put it on the Delta napkin, which, as you said, all good ideas start on a napkin, be it a Delta napkin or a wedding napkin or wherever it might be. Uh, but why was this something that you thought was necessary to bring to the United States? Was there abandonment that you had noticed in the United States? Was there really a need?
Well, I didn't know the answer to that, because you're right. They don't advertise abandoned babies, and if it's not happening in your backyard, you don't know it's happening in California or Texas or New York. And so this isn't a story that a lot of people care to report on. So I had to dig deep into the stats. And the more I read, the more horror it became that this was a problem in our country. Now, it's not like India. India, they're finding 10 babies a day dead in their streets. The United States is not like India, but one baby is too many. If we are having one baby a day or one baby a month or one baby a year, that is one baby that I can save. And so the more I did the research, the more I realized that in America, we're finding a baby every 3 days abandoned. And that's the babies that we're finding. They say that for every baby we find, there's two that we don't. And, we just found in North Carolina, I think last month or the month before, a baby that was, they found the skeletal remains of a newborn in the wall of a home. Like somebody had cut a hole out of the wall in the home. And I guess the next people moving in was remodeling and found a newborn skeletal remains. So, and those had been there for years. So you look at that and you think, well, I could probably make a difference to one, maybe two. And so I started this journey in Indiana because the research that I had done was showing that 2 babies a year were dying in Indiana. And so I launched in Indiana. We have not had a dead baby in Indiana since we launched baby boxes, and we've had 12 babies in our boxes in the last 3 years. And that truly is where the success lies, is when we don't have babies in dumpsters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I can't wait to ask you in just a moment or two here about some of these stories of babies that have been saved. I made a note about this first child in November 2017. We'll touch on that in just a moment. But so this flight back from South Africa, this idea is coming out. You mentioned earlier that you've served as a firefighter, you've been a first responder, and rarely do I think the verse in Jeremiah of, I know well the plans that I have for you, all these plans that are woven together for the good of my people sort of thing, how well it fits your life story, that as somebody who has an intimate understanding of fire halls and such a beautiful opportunity. Share a little bit about how that was so valuable. And obviously, going through your book, you're not the only firefighter who's been involved in this. The person who actually put together the prototype for you was a firefighter as well. Those that were involved in the heating and electrical components of keeping these baby boxes warm. Maybe share about how your background as a first responder, being so familiar with the fire departments and the setup there, why it made sense to have this stationed at fire departments and the journey there, I guess.
Well, I got the love for firefighting when I was in the military. I was in the United States Navy and joined the fire department just because I got a patch on my sleeve, and that patch on my sleeve became like love for the patch on the sleeve. And so when I got out of the military, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so knowing the ins and outs of the fire service, I knew that on the other side of a wall, if I was to put a baby box in the side of a firehouse, that medical personnel would be on the other side of that wall. And the babies that were being abandoned in our country were not born in hospitals. A lot of them still had the placenta still attached. So I knew that these babies had to have medical care immediately. And who better to do that than my friends and people like me that do emergency medicine all the time on the streets and in car accidents, stuff like that. And so, when I launched, I knew that I wanted to do firehouses, but I also wanted to do hospitals because hospitals obviously have medical personnel on the other side of that as well. But during the journey, it's kind of interesting. When I came back to the United States after Cape Town, South Africa, and I took this Delta napkin, I just picked a builder in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he happened to be a firefighter for a town about 30 miles away from me. And it's so interesting because when I walked into his place, he's like, "Hey, it's nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah." And he's like, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "Well, I want you to build me a baby box." And he's like, "A what?" And I'm like, "Well, baby box. I'm going to put them in fire stations and save babies." And he thought I was nuts. He was like, Are you serious? Like, is it, he's like, "I've never heard of that." And I'm like, "It's because it's never been done in America before." And so he's like, "Well, I'll build you anything you want for $700. And so I wrote him a check out of my husband's account for $700 and walked out of there like a boss, and I still have that prototype. And, but having the family dynamic of the fire service, we are a family. Firefighters and medics were family. And so I think Christ knew that I needed that so that they would trust me to launch in their, think about this, guys. What company is going to be okay with me cutting a hole in a $3.5 million firehouse and sticking a box in the wall on a whim? And so I needed them to trust me. And well, as history shows, we just launched our 78th box yesterday, and I've got 78 boxes in firehouses, and I have more friends in the fire service now because of these boxes going into their firehouses than I could have ever imagined.
So, Monica, I guess that leads us to the $1 million question. What is a baby box? Help us out. Is it just, is it just a steel box? What are we looking at? What are we thinking of when we're talking about these baby boxes?
That's the one thing that I get asked the most, is, well, what is a baby box? This is not something that's just common. And so it is literally a box that is made, and then we cut a hole in the side of a firehouse and we slide this box through. So the outside of the baby box is on the outside of the building, and the inside of the baby box is on the inside of the building. So basically what I've made is a window for a baby to come through, like a door through the firehouse for a newborn baby. And so when mom opens the outside door of a baby box, an immediate 911 call goes out. She doesn't have to do anything. She doesn't have to push anything. She doesn't have to, magically type in a number. All she has to do is open that door, and the box is automatically calling 911. And so when she places baby inside, there's a second alarm that is going off. That alarm is not connected to the first alarm. And once she shuts that outside door, the door locks. So baby is now secure inside this box. This box is heated. It is cooled in the summertime. But the average temp in the box is about 80 degrees because newborn babies need heat. So even in the summertime, when you're sitting in your 65-degree office, babies need heat when they're first born. So we keep it about 80 degrees. But the average time for a baby in one of our boxes is right at 2 minutes. And these babies are placed in a medical bassinet. It's a hospital grade bassinet. We actually buy them from the hospital. What you see babies in NICUs, that's what these babies are in. So these babies are safe and secure. Our protocol is 5 minutes or less. These firefighters have to have these babies out of these boxes within 5 minutes. But the average time is right at about 2 minutes because, these babies need somebody to retrieve them as soon as possible because you never know what you're getting. But all of our babies have been healthy. All of our babies have been full term. And you can tell that these mothers love these kids. They just are in a crisis that you and I may never understand.
Mm-hmm. And that leads beautifully into a story that as I mentioned, I read earlier in your book. And I would love to tap in a couple of minutes from now into kind of the journey of idea prototype into your first box and meeting the politicians that were making this happen. But I'm too eager, and I want to hear a success story. I'd love for you to share this first story, especially from November 2017. I think it's so beautiful, and I think that that's the best way to follow up the question of how the box works with how it is working, sort of thing. Tell us about a baby who has been saved through this Safe Haven baby box setup in a fire department.
So the November of 2017, I was actually flying to Arkansas, and I was on a plane. And one of our protocols is when you get a baby in your box, you have to call us within 2 hours. Well, I'm really close with the guys at Cold Springs Fire Department. Again, it's a family. And so I landed in Arkansas, and I had missed calls from Warren Smith, who's the assistant chief at Cold Springs. And this is like 11:30 at night. And I'm like, I don't know what he's calling me at 11:30 at night for. There must be something wrong with his box. And so I didn't even listen to his voicemail. I picked it up and I could hear the sirens in the background. And they were on their way to the hospital with a newborn baby. And I literally sat back down on this flight because, for this child, I had prayed. I had been praying that a mother would trust me and bring her child to me to keep this child safe. And for the first time in American history, I was seeing this unfold, for the first time. And this little girl was 7 pounds, healthy, full term, wrapped in a sweatshirt. And it's interesting because the fire department thought that this was a false alarm. We had launched these boxes 18 months prior and we hadn't had anything. And so the fire chief, now this is a volunteer fire station. Nobody lives at this firehouse. Nobody sleeps at this firehouse, but the alarms call 911. So we know that this box was activated. And so the fire chief headed down to the station, and Warren Smith, who is the assistant fire chief, said, well, hey, I'm coming. And he lives a little bit farther than the fire chief. And the fire chief goes, hey, I got this, just go back home. I'll just reset the alarm on the baby box. Probably nothing, kids playing around. And so he gets inside and he immediately sees an arm. And he said, and this was beautifully said by him. He said, Monica, if you want to bring a grown man to his knees, have him pull an abandoned baby from a box that is heated and cooled and this baby is safe from. And so, as the story goes, this baby was just perfectly healthy, and she's now with her adoptive family. She's 3. And she was actually at our blessing a couple of months ago in Franklin, Indiana, where she now resides with her adoptive family. But, it's interesting, though, on this case, too, because, of course, I'm calling everybody, hey, we got a baby in our box. Hey, this, hey, that. And so I call our electrical engineer that wired this box up to be perfect. And we knew that it could not fail. And I told him this box has to work 100% of the time, 100%, all the time. And so the first words out of his mouth when I said, hey, Rick, we got a baby in the Cold Springs Fire Department baby box. And his first words was, your crazy idea worked. And I was like, did you doubt me? Like, or were you doubting me? And he's like, he says, I believed in you, Monica, but it actually worked. And so she was 1 out of 12. We've had 12 total in our boxes, and all of them have been adopted, and I get to see a lot of them and watch them grow up. And it truly is a blessing for me to see the success and the fruits of our labor.
That is absolutely amazing. And praise the Lord for that, Monica. I'm so glad to hear that story. I mean, that just like, you get all the feels when you hear that story and when you read about this as well. And I feel kind of bad transitioning a little bit to sort of the details of it when there are so many other good stories like this. But just to learn a little bit more about how you got these boxes in. I'm sure there was a lot of perhaps some political work that had to be done. There was some convincing for the very first fire hall. Because it's not like 78 fire halls had it already, and this one's just following in the footsteps of 78 before them. But you're looking at the first fire hall. This is something that hadn't been done before in America, as you said. And so the politicians, I'm sure, had 1,000 questions, as did others. Could you speak to some of that process, how you got these boxes going politically and how you actually made them a reality, just going through the loopholes and perhaps the red tape that you may have experienced?
Yeah, so I contacted a legislator, and this was back when I got back from Cape Town, South Africa, and said, "Hey, can you draft me up a baby box bill?" And he's like, "A what?" Like, I'm like, "A baby box bill. I want to put baby boxes in fire stations to save babies." And he looked at me like I was crazy too. And so, he worked tirelessly. When I gave him the stats of how many babies were still being abandoned, even with a safe haven law, he was sold. He could see that these babies were being left at the doorsteps of safe haven locations. And why is that? Why would they not walk in and hand the child to a person? And it's pretty clear these women wanted anonymity. They didn't want anybody to know who they were. And so the very first baby box bill was passed in 2015. And in 2016, I started working hard to get the very first baby box. And it's interesting that you brought up the very first baby box, because if you think that I was not going to have the very first baby box at my fire station, you're kidding yourself, because that, of course, had to be the case. Well, and it's interesting too, because my husband is the mayor of our city. And so it was really easy to talk him into allowing me to put a box in his fire station if he wanted to come home and sleep with his wife at night. And so I launched the very first baby box. Safe Haven Baby Box number 1 is at my fire station in Woodburn, Indiana. And then 2 days later, we launched the baby box that had the first baby in it, which was Coal Springs Fire Department in Michigan City, Indiana. They've had 2 babies in their boxes, and then Woodburn has had 1. So it does take a lot of politics, unfortunately, to get this done. But Christ knew what he was doing when he gave me this job, because he knew I would never quit.
In a moment here, I'd love to ask a little bit more about how different fire departments and other entities can approach you. But I'm curious how the process works in getting more fire departments and hospitals, as you mentioned, on board. You said that you're over 75 now, boxes largely in Indiana, but also throughout America. What does the process look like? Are you approaching fire halls? Are they approaching you? Is it a bit of both? What does that process look like now?
I don't go after firehouses unless there's a huge problem in a city. Like if there's been 5 abandoned babies in the last 2 years, I'm going to start trying to get this location. But the majority of firehouses, if you pull a dead baby from a dumpster, these firefighters can't. We just can't handle it. And so trying to be proactive on the approach and not having that happen again is what these firefighters are looking to do. And so they're usually calling us saying, "Hey, how do we get a baby box?" And I started this as a nonprofit organization because I knew that I never wanted to profit off of abandoned babies or saved babies. So I started this as a nonprofit so that I could also help raise the funds for these boxes, because fire departments don't have money. We just don't. There's just not any money for extra stuff. And I didn't want to take away from the life-saving equipment that they needed on those trucks for a baby box that may be used once a year. And so starting it as a nonprofit allowed me to go out and ask people to donate to us for them. And so the majority of our firehouses don't pay for the baby box. It's the hands and feet of Christ. God's people are the ones that are saying, "Here's $50, Monica. Here's $100, Monica. I want a box in my community." And they're doing the legwork because they're seeing the success in Indiana. But we did start in Indiana. So, of course, the majority of our boxes are here. But now that other states are seeing what Indiana has done, they're jumping on board. And more states are doing it. Right now, we're in, I think, 6 states. And we also, this past legislative session, passed the law in 5 more states. So we'll be launching in 5 more states. And it's all these states that are saying, what's Indiana doing? They're not having an abandoned baby problem. Their infant mortality rate is dropping in their state. What are they doing to make this happen? And we're just leading the way in this ministry and this movement.
Absolutely. And maybe share from there the kind of the statistics that you've seen in Indiana. You alluded to it earlier, how you haven't seen an abandoned baby in Indiana since the first box went into into the fire hall. Share a little bit more about how this is actually changing and how these are actually saving lives. You've mentioned the stories and alluded to the stories of the babies that have been saved, but maybe share a little bit more for words of encouragement, whether for a town mayor, whether it's for a fire department or hospital, whatever it may be. what words of encouragement would you have regarding both the statistics and the underlying principle of making this more and more common throughout America and around the world, hopefully?
Well, I would encourage them not to be reactive and be proactive on this movement, because when you're being reactive, that means you've already found a dead baby in your community, and then we've already lost. We've lost a child. We don't want to go down that road. So be the proactive mayor. Take the bold step. Say no baby's going to die in our community. Indiana, before I launched baby boxes, and I didn't want to do this nationwide. I just thought that I would save a few babies in Indiana, still work as a firefighter and a medic, because I knew that 2 to 3 babies were being found dead in our state every year. And I thought, well, if I can just save those 2 to 3 babies, I mean, that's awesome. And so since we launched baby boxes, we haven't had a dead baby in our state since, and we've had 12 babies in our boxes. And so when you look at that, we were averaging 2 to 3 dead babies. We've literally turned the tide. So these women now are keeping their children safe. Their lives are going on. The child is getting adopted into a loving home. And the prosecutors aren't prosecuting mothers in Indiana anymore for dumping their kids in trash cans and dumpsters. We've made this legal for them. If they find themselves in a situation that you and I may never understand, and I'm not here to judge or to shame them, they're going to handle the situation the best that they know how for their circumstances. But I've made this available for them to make sure that they stay legal and they keep their child safe. And I think, going back, and I hate to jump back to this, but getting to know my biological mother, I think truly gave me the empathy that I needed to walk alongside these women. Because, 20 years ago, I probably would have said, what? Oh my gosh, no. What do you mean putting a baby in a box? That's no baby, and it's like, but getting to know the circumstances of my reality with my birth mom truly gave me the empathy that I needed to not judge these women and not shame these women and give them an option that other people might not choose, but this is what they're choosing that is best for them. And I'm not here to judge or to shame them for it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You answered a good amount of questions that I have in terms of getting mayors and local municipalities to get these boxes. And I just want to reiterate a few of the things. So one of the questions I had was about the cost, but you're saying that this is going to cost the fire hall and the city next to nothing. Another question I had was, what about the safety of these babies? You talked about the temperature controlled environment that they'll be in until someone finds them. You talk about the 5-minute rule with your average being 2 minutes. One of the questions is about, what about those fire halls where there are only volunteer firefighters and no one's there around the clock 24/7? And you've answered that as well. I can think of perhaps small reasons why mayors and local municipalities might not want these boxes, but maybe speak to some of the sort of frequently asked questions that mayors have that would sort of make them hesitate on getting these boxes, and share with us why that hesitation is unnecessary and why this is something that they can actually really move forward with.
Well, one of the things is liability. In today's day and age, liability. And so what I've done in the States is, through the legislation, I have given these departments what we call in America first responder indemnification, which doesn't put the liability back on them. And so that is the one thing that I would encourage any state that passes a baby box bill to make sure that you have first responder indemnification. Another thing that people ask a lot is, what if the box fails? And we have made this box with 3 alarms. One of them is a power off alarm. So if this box ever loses power, 911's getting notified. The box is no good with no power. So we knew we needed to make sure that was covered. And then the box locks. It's heated. It's cold. Linda Zanacco, who's a great friend of mine, she actually goes around this country and buries the dead babies that are found. And that's just a horrible job for anyone. And when she testified in front of the Senate in Indiana a few years ago, when we were advancing our law, that question came up. What if a baby dies in your box, Monica? And she got up there and she said it so perfectly, because, she gets the autopsy reports from these babies that she buries. She adopts them in death and then buries them with a name and with dignity. And she says, I would much rather bury a baby that didn't have his arms and legs gnawed at by animals that was placed in a box that passed away than to bury a baby that is missing half of its limbs because animals and it was that part of this never truly kind of hit me until she said it. And if you look at our logo now has a baby's footprint on it, and that footprint is baby Amelia. And baby Amelia was the last baby found dead in Indiana. And the reason why we have her footprint is because that was the only thing we could get from her, because she was left in the woods. And so I put that footprint in our logo so that everyone would know the humanity of finding a baby in the woods, that, you know, that is the worst option. But if a child is going to die, I don't think 2 minutes in one of my boxes is going to change the outcome for a child that Christ has already called home.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that you touched on earlier, Monica, is the value of awareness. That as you, I mean, I'm sure that you guys are having big celebrations every time you have one of these boxes launched, but maybe share a little bit about the importance of the educational component, actually teaching, whether they're high school students or college kids or whomever they may be, about the presence of these boxes. Peter, you and I are very actively involved in the educational arm of the pro-life movement, trying to engage people even before they become pregnant, and at times when they are pregnant or after they've chosen abortion. Share maybe a little bit about why it's so important that you continue the speaking that you've done for so long, and other groups needing to increase their educational efforts to make people aware of, whether it's these safe haven boxes, whether it's other resources and support that's available, so that when people find themselves in those overwhelming, incredibly challenging situations, they already have a bit of an idea at the very least as to what options they truly have on the table that aren't going to directly and intentionally kill their child.
Well, and you absolutely said it perfectly. They have to know about this prior to, or they're going to make a rash decision when this child is born. And so education is pivotal, that they know about it prior to the crisis occurring. So getting into the high schools, getting into the colleges, I mean, we've helped a 13-year-old and we've helped a 44-year-old. So we have a huge awareness of, what's the word I'm looking for? From 13 to 44, basically every menopausal woman needs to know about the safe haven law. If I'm going to reach every mother that needs to know this law. And so, being in the schools is pivotal. Being on billboards is pivotal. Interesting enough, in America, we actually have some of the abortion facilities that have our literature in there. I would love nothing more than to shut these places down. But there are women that walk into abortion facilities and get a pregnancy test and walk out and never go back. They need to know their options. I don't know if you guys had seen the case out of Alabama where one of the cases went to the Supreme Court. And they had mentioned when Roe v. Wade in America was passed that there was no option after the child was born other than adoption. And in this case, they actually mentioned the safe haven law, that now we have a different option, for these moms, and I truly believe also that for such a time as this, that these boxes are needed, because I believe we're not only going to make abortion illegal, we're also going to make it unthinkable one day. And what are these women and these men going to do? We haven't changed the culture. So they're still going to be getting pregnant. They're still going to be, having sex, premarital sex. And so we have to make sure that they have an option, if they choose to hide this pregnancy and carry this child to term. So I think that Christ knew exactly when these boxes needed to come and when they needed to explode. And I don't think that's, I think this was the timing that has always been there.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to frame it. And as we start to draw towards the end of our conversation, Monica, it's been so great to chat with you about your story, about this movement. I'm reminded of a very humorous, in my opinion, anecdote that you include in your book about speaking at a gala and sitting with a Grand Knight from a Knights of Columbus Council who asked you what you needed. And at the time, it didn't wasn't something that was on top of your mind, and so you asked simply for the reimbursement for the initial prototype.
Yeah.
I wonder, if I ask you the question now, what you need to take the next step, what is necessary for these safe haven boxes to grow even further beyond where they're at right now? What is your answer? What is necessary at this point in time?
I would say education. A lot of people don't realize that I don't advocate for the boxes. I'm out there pushing installing boxes as a last resort option. I don't want a mother to choose it. I want her to choose it only if it's the only option she has left. But we have to get out there and give the education to these moms that there are crisis pregnancy centers that can walk alongside them. They do an amazing job making sure that these babies are safe, and these moms and dads are safe and well equipped to care for their child. Adoption is another amazing option that truly gives the possibility of adoption is basically endless, and so I want these women to choose other options. But I also know that if we don't have this last resort option for maybe 1 out of 10 mothers or 1 out of 100 mothers, we're going to continue to find babies in dumpsters. And so the motto on the back of the inside of my box is actually sketched in the acrylic door. It says, "Saving babies one box at a time." And so I would hope that we could educate better the options for mom before they get to my box, because they can choose something way better than a baby box at a firehouse. Because and also to just kind of back on that, I can't help those mothers with counseling if they don't tell me. They place their baby in their box and walk away and never call me. I can't help them. I want to help them. I want to walk alongside them. But I want the box there for those who choose it. But I would hope that we would have enough education for every woman to choose a good option for her.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Monica, for that and for all the work that you do. I'm wondering if there are people who want to learn more about the Safe Haven baby boxes, or even want to find your book, Blessed to Have Been Abandoned, The Story of the Baby Box Lady. Where can they find both? Where can we learn more about the Safe Haven baby boxes, and where can we find your book?
Amazon. I became an Amazon bestseller in May. So Amazon is definitely the best place to get it right now. Or go to our website at shbb.org. There's photos on there also of some of the babies that have been placed in our boxes. So you get to see the humanity side of these boxes as well, that we follow. So those would be the best 2 places to go: Amazon to buy Blessed to Have Been Abandoned, or shbb.org.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And for our listeners, as always, we promise to put those links in the description. So just go down to the show notes, the video description, and find those links. Learn more about the Safe Haven baby boxes and purchase the book by Monica Kelsey, Blessed to Have Been Abandoned, The Story of the Baby Box Lady. Monica, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. We learned a tremendous amount. We're so thankful and grateful for the work that you do, and God bless you as you continue this work. So thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me.
That is Monica Kelsey of Safe Haven Baby Boxes. As we promised, you can find the links to her book and the link to the organization in the description to learn more. Cam, what are some thoughts that you have as we wrap up this episode?
Wow, a couple of thoughts. I mean, first of all, what an inspiring and incredible woman who has been able to allow her story to speak light into so much darkness, this being conceived in rape, being abandoned at birth, and how she's been able to use this story to encourage and empower mothers and fathers across the country. Absolutely beautiful. I love the way that she focuses on the education. Obviously, Peter, you and I have a very soft spot when it comes to education, and not just because we randomly happened upon the educational arm of the pro-life movement, but rather because we recognize the value of educating people proactively. That she put it very well, that it's not just making abortion illegal or unnecessary, but also making it unthinkable. And the last thing that really stands out to me that I really, really appreciated her saying there right towards the end, that she's not trying to get people to use these baby boxes whenever possible. And this isn't so pridefully driven that the success of her speaking, the success of her movement is that babies are being placed in these boxes. Rather, She wants children to be raised, if at all possible, by responsible families, by their biological parents, by adoptive parents. She wants to connect people with pregnancy care centers and whatnot, but she recognizes this as what ought to be the last option, sort of thing. And so often in our culture, we view abortion as the last option. She's looking at this as being a necessary and last option. And she's not celebrating every time a child has been placed in one of these boxes because of her own success, but rather because that was a child that may have otherwise been abandoned in the forest or in a garbage dumpster or something of that nature, and that it's the final avenue of defense, as it were. And so I think that's really profound, that she wasn't so taken by her own project that she's trying to somehow pull babies away from pregnancy care centers and get them into her boxes, but rather, I hope that these boxes are basically never used so long as no children are ever abandoned. If ever there's an abandoned child, then we need to have boxes there proactively so that never happens. But Lord willing, all of these mothers access to the help and support they need from their local pregnancy care center. So I found it a very, very beautiful way of tying this all together, that she sees this as a necessity. She wants people to be aware of it, but she certainly prefers these mothers to be connecting with their local pregnancy care centers and whatnot to care for these children.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And one of the things I liked is just the unique nature of the projects that she's working on. This is not something I had heard about probably, a month and a half ago. I'd never heard about these baby boxes electronically monitored, and just all of the things that she talked about. And so it's really, really cool to see the movement that's taking place in the United States. And I really hope, Cam, that we're able to connect with politicians here in Canada as well, whether it be our listeners doing so, or some others that we work with, and seeing this happen in our cities as well. I can think about a lot of hurt and just homelessness and some of the other issues that our cities face, and there certainly are babies that are conceived in the midst of the difficulties. So having options like this available would make sure that these children have somewhere to go. If they have nowhere else to go, it's not that they need to be aborted, but they have somewhere to go under the safety and care of the firefighters first, and then going to a loving home after that. So if you're in a position where maybe you're the mayor or the mayor's assistant, or maybe you are politically minded, you have connections with the fire chief or whoever it is, whoever you have connections with, this could be something that you propose to your city council or anywhere else. So we want to encourage you to check out more about the Safe Haven baby boxes on their website. That's shbb.org, shbb.org. And learn more as well about Monica's story by checking out her book on Amazon. Link will be in the show notes. Don't forget to check out her book, Blessed to Have Been Abandoned, the story of the baby box lady. One final thing as well, we don't have our shirts on right now, but as you've seen in previous episodes, we have these cool shirts. The Pro-Life Guys logo on it. There's one that says change minds, save lives, transform culture. There's one with Cam's character on it, which is absolutely gorgeous. And so if you would like to get some of the merch, we have some mugs coming out. We have other Cam, your favorite, the Scotch glasses that are coming out as well. So lots of cool things coming out. If you would like to get any of those, do find them on our website, prolifeguys.com. Not only are you going to receive some pretty cool merch, but the proceeds and the money we make from these merch items will go to pushing the show even further, to marketing the show, to creating better content, to just the behind the scenes sort of production work, making sure that everything gets better so that more people are inclined to listen to the podcast, more people hear about the podcast, and more people are equipped with good apologetics to use in their conversations, and more people know about what's going on in the abortion war. Along the same lines, if you want a discount code on all the merch in our store, you can get that discount code by becoming a patron of the Pro-Life Guys. The effect will be the same. You'll be supporting the mission, supporting the vision, and really helping not just getting, us on the airwaves, but getting the message on the airwaves. If you are listening to this, we suspect that you are passionately pro-life like we are, want to see something done, want to see more done than just arguing about abortion after church on a Sunday morning over coffee, but actually see the culture being changed, the culture being confronted. We really want to encourage you to become a patron of the Pro-Life Guys podcast. You can do so at patreon.com/prolifeguys. That's patreon.com/prolifeguys. Don't forget to share this episode with your friends, your family, and everyone else in your social circles and in your sphere of influence. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you tune in again next time. God bless you all.